Welcome to The Beat, and we begin with this breaking news. President Trump is facing all of these economic problems, many of his own making, and we'll walk through some of those. But the breaking news is in the context of his flailing trade war. Now, Trump is threatening to do something that legal experts say he does not have the authority to do, and that certainly there is no case law or precedent for doing. With the American economy potentially hanging in the balance because of this flailing, many say, failed tariff war. Donald Trump going after the independent Fed chairman, Jerome Powell. Now, that is an individual that the markets and business people think a lot about, and most other people never think about. But he has that independence because we don't have a government system that deals with the markets on a partisan basis when it comes to the Fed. He oversees the central bank of the United States. And he said in that independent role, some basic, even factual things about the problems with the trade war, how it risks stoking inflation and other issues, which is literally his job. But Donald Trump, and the way he governs, views that as some sort of disloyalty to his chosen and very controversial tariff agenda.
Said that the termination of Jerome Powell cannot come fast enough. He says he won't leave it, even if you ask him to.
Oh, he'll leave. If I ask him to, he'll be out of there. But I don't think he's doing the job. He's too late, always too late, a little slow, and I'm not happy with him. I let him know it, and if I want him out, he'll be out of there real fast, believe me.
Couple of points there. Number one, the president obviously can speak about his views, opinions, or disagreements with Powell or anyone else. So the part of this that shows that standoff still reflects the tension between the problems that Trump faces on the tariff agenda, including widespread criticism that we've reported on from independent economists, from experts, the markets themselves speaking volumes and loudly against those tariffs, as well as the conservative Wall Street Journal, MAGA banker allies of Trump. It's well known that there are a lot of problems with how his tariff war is going. As for Powell, I just want to show you all he did was discuss what he views as the facts and evidence on how Trump's tariffs hurt the economy.
The level of tariff increases announced so far is significantly larger than anticipated, and the same is likely to be true of the economic effects. Tariffs are highly likely to generate at least a temporary rise in inflation.
Tariffs will make inflation worse. That means prices go up. Trump famously ran on bringing prices down. So this is a problem for people's real lives, as well as obviously politically, and we'll get to how Trump's economic problems are dragging down his economic approval rating, which is the context for some of this. Powell also said that, well, this is something Trump probably won't understand, but Powell said that he will continue to do his job independently under the legal authority he has, because it's not like Secretary of State or a political appointee, right? He has this independent term, and he will resist any Trump pressure.
We're never going to be influenced by any political pressure. People can say whatever they want. That's fine. That's not a problem. But we will do what we do strictly without consideration of political or any other extraneous factors.
That's the Fed chair's statement. That's how it's supposed to be. And Powell is not some sort of woke lefty Biden person if Trump wants to sort of try to mute or diminish the economic concern here by making it political. As we're showing you on the screen here, it was then first-term President Donald Trump who appointed Powell in 2017. Now, this idea, which Trump danced around, you'll notice he didn't want to say something that maybe won't happen that makes him look powerless. He just said if he asked Powell to leave, he would. We've just shown you Powell saying, nope, he's not responding to such political pressure. But then you get into how we're not in normal times. Let me show you exactly what the state of play is legally if Trump were to try to push this farther. Legal experts agree, the New York Times reports, the president, any president, probably does not have the authority to fire the Fed chair over a policy disagreement. It hasn't been tested in court, the Times adds, which is another way of saying no other president in any economic situation with whatever debates has done this in a manner that it went to the Supreme Court. And the Federal Reserve is the central bank. It's supposed to be independent, and everybody would want that because you don't want politics and political needs coming in to distort the entire national banking system in ways that are designed to benefit, for example, one politician over literally everybody else. So this is one of those things that's always been considered a good idea. Powell, the independents, Powell was asked about all of this right after the election.
Some of the president-elect's advisors have suggested that you should resign. If he asked you to leave, would you go?
No.
Can you follow up on, do you think that legally you're not required to leave?
No.
That's what it looks like when you have the cards. We're so used to political types saying more than is necessary, and no shade. You can say a lot of us in the journalism field say more than is sometimes necessary, but the answer was no, and the follow-up was no. Inside Trump's administration, we're also seeing cracks. Remember, there's a lot of bluster. There's a lot of talk about testing or defying the courts and doing what they want, but there is also a brewing economic problem. We've been covering that when it was at its worst in those first few days after the tariffs. Trump bought some time by basically retreating while claiming he wasn't retreating, but he lowered many of the tariffs. The China part is still going strong. We've been covering that. His own Treasury Secretary, when you look at all this, admits that the Trump tariffs, as they stand, are just not sustainable.
How much is the president willing to go beyond 145% tariffs on China, or is that the ceiling?
Look, I think no one thinks that these are sustainable over the long run.
No one thinks they're sustainable over the long run. And you'll have to pardon some of these clips are people speaking sort of very slow and dry because, well, a lot of them aren't politicians. They're not performers. They're just saying things like, no, I'm not leaving. No, the tariffs aren't sustainable, and some other sometimes technical jargon. All of that is bad news for Trump because his whole thing is trying to act strong and threaten these long-term tariffs and say he can carry out this trade war when the actual real-world fundamentals have already caused him to retreat in part. Then there's the public. People are souring on this fast. Donald Trump now, we can tell you tonight, has the worst economic numbers of his time ever in office. A majority of the public disapproves of his handling of the economy. That used to be, in fairness, something that people had higher expectations for. During the campaign, they thought he might even do better than the inflation of the last term. Well, now you see 55%. And I want to leave this up on the screen for a second and tell you, we all remember the election. If a majority of 55% disapprove of his handling of the economy, that includes roughly people who voted for him because he got about half the country's votes. 43% approve. More people also think that this Trump economy will get worse, meaning just the fact that he's in charge, their economic outlook is about half think things will get even worse, and they don't like the way they are now. Small businesses we've seen suffering under the tariff risk. Other folks already having to make adjustments depending on whether you deal with China and other places, and a lot of uncertainty, which nobody likes. We're seeing concern about a whole range of Trump issues, even in red districts. So the polling is a macro measure. You can see Republicans being confronted, even in places they were elected. And remember, they recently did win. Trump and Republicans were winning as recently as November, of course. But now that we're past the campaign promise mode and into the live under the Trump-Musk agenda, people have some pretty strong views in red areas.
This is wrong. These cuts are wrong. We have to support our veterans.
You're letting people who aren't even sworn into the government go in and wreak havoc.
If you want to shout and chant, we will have you removed.
I think the general population is sick and tired of hearing about the tax cuts for the well.
My 100% support for DOGE to continue today and tomorrow.
You can head out. The protest is outside. Thank you very much.
It's been ridiculous to think that you can't.
Yeah.
So the polling, opposition to what Trump's doing on the issue that we always know, it's the economy stupid, affects people the quickest and the most deeply. That's the polling. The markets, which not everyone is invested in, but affect companies, because if companies lose 10 or 20% of their value, they can't keep paying all the same jobs and employees over the long run. Markets have spoken. And then you see this in the pockets, and these are just the places where you have Republicans who are willing to hold events. Chuck Grassley, whatever you think of him, was one of the clips we showed you there. to Chuck Grassley's credit, he has made a point of always holding events across Iowa throughout his career. And he's one of the longest serving members in Congress, period. He's still doing that. So whatever you think of his politics, he has been consistent. There are a heck of a lot of other folks in the Republican Party who aren't holding those meetings. Indeed, party advisors have encouraged folks to just avoid showing that at all because they don't want it to end up on your TV screen. So in all that context, we see a high level of opposition and a bunch more that is obscured or even deliberately hidden. So why is it so hard for the Republicans in Congress who are elected on their own? Some of them have their own terms to fill out, longer, say, than a 4-year term. For the Senate, for example, they're serving 6-year terms. Why is it so hard for them to stand up if this is where everyone feels, even before we hit 100 days? Well, here's one Republican senator's view.
That's what I'm stating. I have not been here before. I'll tell you, I'm oftentimes very anxious myself about using my voice, because retaliation is real.
Retaliation from Trump and his MAGA allies is real, and it's not right, says that Republican senator. And again, part of our job here is to make sense of the evidence for you or sift through it together. That's one person out of Alaska with a long career who's willing to admit that. How many other people are thinking that in the Republican Party but won't say it in public, with a president who is vowing this type of retribution, cracking down on law firms and campuses, threatening people with political investigations, some of which seem to have begun? That's the context for what we're living through, even as the public says, in so many different measurements, this is not what they wanted. However they voted, it's not what they want to continue. I've got a special guest on all of this when we're back in 90 seconds.
Understand this. If Chairman Powell can be fired by the President of the United States, it will crash the markets in the United States.
A warning from Senator Warren there. We're joined by Justin Wolfers, professor of public policy and economics at the University of Michigan, and host of the Think Like an Economist podcast, which we only want to do a little bit, to be honest, Justin, just the right amount. Welcome.
All right, mate, we'll just do a little bit.
Fair. Let's start with why these two are beefing. The beef mostly one way, you might say, from Trump, although Powell has clearly within his evidence and factual managing of these issues said that there are implications to this trade war. But before we get to this whole firing part, what is this dispute really about?
Right. So let's get first of all the facts out there, which is, according to Trump, it's about competence. Jay Powell has been one of our finest public servants and, in fact, one of our best ever central bank governors. He has pulled off what many people said a couple of years ago was impossible, which is a soft landing. He managed to bring us down from very high very high inflation of 9%. Inflation's back on track towards being 2-point-something% now. And he's done all of that without creating a recession, which is just an extraordinary achievement. We got through the COVID pandemic and we managed to keep our economy too. So I'm going to tip my hat to Chairman Powell. So it could be about competency, except he's remarkably competent. It might just be that, there are some people in the world who like to externalize. When things aren't going well, they never say, it's on me. I've caused chaos in the economy and in financial markets. I inherited a wonderful economy. Things aren't going so well right now. Let me look within. Instead, what they do is they look without. Or it could just be that Chairman Powell has said out loud what is utterly obvious and what anyone on Wall Street or any academic economist would say, which is that tariffs cause inflation to be higher, they cause unemployment to be higher, they cause the economy to contract, and that presents a very difficult policy dilemma.
Right. And I mean, Trump's, as you say, he may not be the type to do a deeper soul searching about any potential failures thus far in his administration. But he's posting online and saying in response to these reporters' questions that he has a problem with Powell. And what Powell has said is the tariffs policy as it's currently constructed doesn't work. So what does that tell us about the long-term viability? I mean, they got through what was a real panic, and now day to day, we're not seeing the same volatility, but they seem to still, in the Trump administration, want some off-ramp from that early pain.
Look, the off-ramp doesn't run through monetary policy. There's not just one economic shock right now. There is the tariff shock. The tariff shock, as Chairman Powell correctly said, will cause inflation, will upend the global order. He didn't say that part, but it's important to note. Will slow the economy and is utterly distracting all of us at the moment. The other is that this is a White House that changes its mind from day to day, that is following policies that are not in any conventional textbook. They're making it up as they go along, and they've frankly lost the confidence of markets. We see that any measure of economic uncertainty is as high as it's ever been. So it's quite remarkable to create more uncertainty than a global pandemic, but the president has managed that. That uncertainty, of course, then means that people are holding back. No CEO is going to greenlight a project right now when they don't know what the business environment is going to look like next week, let alone next year.
Right.
So
and to your point, that's what Trump did. There's whether you want to have tariffs this high, and then there's how he rolled it out. And he seems to have managed to spook the markets on both levels. Then there's the Ferris Bueller of it all in explaining why past tariff failures have sort of made everyone more skeptical. We went back on this program and played the great scene. I want to bring it back because others, like Chairman Powell, quoted Ferris Bueller recently to make the same point. Let's take a look.
As that great Chicagoan Ferris Bueller once noted, life moves pretty fast.
Which anyone raised or lowered, raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
What's Powell doing there? And I've got to expect, as an economist, you remember that as was one of the great, but also only Smoot-Hawley references in cinema.
There's frankly not enough of them. And an interesting side note there, the actor talking about Smoot-Hawley, Ben Stein, is a deeply conservative fellow who thinks that tariffs are terrible. He thought Smoot-Hawley was bad, but if you thought Smoot-Hawley was bad, the Depression-era tariffs, realize that what President Trump has unleashed is in fact bigger. So it might be time for a rerun.
Boom. Justin Wolfers, we've done some thinking. I hope it was at an economist level. Thanks for joining us.
A pleasure, mate.
Appreciate it. By the end of the hour, we're going to ask the big question, where does Bernie Sanders go after hitting the Coachella main stage? Also, another court loss for Trump on the deportation issue. We have a breakdown, and Emily Bazelon coming up. Turning to President Trump's rolling deportation clashes, an appeals court today rebuked the administration in the case of the mistakenly deported man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, that we've been covering. The administration has been accused of basically flouting the order to facilitate his return. There's been a lot of debate over what that word will now require, and the judge says it's difficult in some cases to get to the very heart of the matter. But in this case, it's not hard at all, saying that Trump administration lawyers are asserting a right to stash away residents of this country, America, in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process that is the foundation of our constitutional order. Those are strong words, and if you're keeping track, stronger than the way Chief Justice Roberts put it in the unanimous opinion that did rule against Trump, but has yet to result in the return of this individual, to effectuate the result, as lawyers have said. But this is still early days for this clash. Senator Chris Van Hollen from Maryland went to El Salvador over this issue, saying that he has his own standing in the co-equal branch of government because this is a constituent. And he states that despite making that full trip, he was denied entry into the prison where he wanted to inspect and work on this issue in order to check on, at the minimum, the presence and welfare of Mr. Garcia.
Our goal was very simple today, which was to check on the health and well-being of Kilmar. We were stopped by soldiers at a checkpoint we were told by the soldiers that they'd been ordered not to allow us to proceed any further. I do intend to keep at this until we ensure that Mr. Obregor Garcia has his rights to due process.
Remember, that is due process that has been denied. The Supreme Court saying not only was it the mistake that the Trump administration admits, but the individual should be returned. And as I've told you, if they get away with this, and that can happen to that individual, it can happen to others. And if an American says, hey, I'm an American, I shouldn't be rotting away in a foreign prison, well, who would they be saying that to if due process is destroyed and they get away with it? That's why the stakes are high on this issue. The district judge indicates she may hold the government in some type of contempt. And the judge overseeing a related case on the wartime powers here also alluding to contempt over the defiance that those officials turn around the original flight to El Salvador. All of this is about power. Can Donald Trump seize wartime powers when there is no declared war against El Salvador or this gang? A judge is also weighing if the government should be forced to give notice to people that it would ever deport in this manner, since this is clearly on the table. And plaintiffs' lawyers noting the last time this act was even invoked, it was World War II, and those deemed to be dangerous to the public during a world war had a month's notice before they could be removed. So if you're watching and thinking, well, we got to be tough on immigration, or you have a person who's more sympathetic to Trump and MAGA and says, hey, it's time for tough measures, the lawyer's pointing out there, we're not even at the World War II level due process. And I don't think anyone can seriously say that these threats, which are, of course, real to people, we have gangs and other violence in this country, I don't think anyone can seriously claim they're at the level of Germany and Japan in World War II. As for Trump's so-called retribution tour, administration is going after these schools we've told you about, including Harvard, because they won't buckle to a big government shakedown. And Trump is hitting back in ways that may or may not be legal. A lot of this is being tested, but trying to seize and freeze over $2 billion of what was already authorized funding for Harvard. And some of that money goes to things everybody wants, like solving Alzheimer's. The Post reports that the government also had no proof of any specific laws broken by Harvard in the review of the documents they did. But the Trump administration now says it will ask the IRS to punish Harvard in what sounds like a political manner. So this probably shouldn't work if there's a factual process, but they want to take away the very valuable tax-exempt status because Harvard is not some for-profit company. It's tax-exempt like universities and houses of worship often are. DHS also threatening to revoke Harvard's eligibility to admit foreign students, saying that's something they could try to yank. The state's Democratic governor, Maura Healey, spoke to us about all of this.
That this is really just another attempt by Donald Trump to silence those who disagree with him, to bully, in this case, our colleges and universities. It's an abuse of power. It smacks of the authoritarian regimes of past when you talk about silencing law firms, companies, colleges, and universities.
Healey mentions law firms. The top firms are a huge target, and some have already buckled under the pressure. They represent all kinds of individuals. The New York Times reporting that the firms who agreed to work with the administration thought they could cut some kind of deal, but Trump, even on the deal they cut, wants to move the goalposts, basically going from what was going to be selected pro bono cases over time, that's voluntary work, which could take many years, to now arguing maybe the firms have to service his administration as he goes. Negotiating trade deals, which, by the way, most people say is not how that really works and is not realistic, or defending his own chosen allies. It's all adding up really fast. There's a lot of concern, there's a lot of folding, and there's some high-level resistance. What is the right path, and how do you challenge these things when you know practically the Supreme Court can barely get its own recent order enforced? Those are some of the pretty important, we think, but also difficult, vexing questions we're going to pose to the great Emily Bazelon right after this.
I asked him if he had any evidence that Kilmar was a member of MS-13 or had committed any crimes, and he said no. His answer was that essentially the Trump administration is paying the government of El Salvador taxpayer money to keep this person here.
Senator Van Hollen speaking about that case to our own Rachel Maddow here last night. I'm joined by Emily Bazelon from the New York Times Magazine. Welcome.
Thanks so much.
You look at the pushback and even rebukes to the Trump administration here, while their strategy is clearly to flood the zone, as they say, and test what will actually be required. They clearly don't care about the other downsides, ethical, governmental, or public pressure otherwise, from being sort of rebuked and trashed in court this way. I mean, many administrations worry about that kind of thing. They don't. So what do you see working here?
Well, I think that the Trump administration is going so far on a number of fronts that they're forcing a confrontation, right? I mean, the courts can't simply roll over and let the government defy their orders. Harvard can't just roll over and accept $2 billion in cut funds and accept the government's demands, which were essentially a kind of takeover of the university. There are just some basic principles at stake, and judges are going to continue to care about the rule of law, and some of them will try to stand up for it, and universities care about academic freedom and being able to make their own decisions. And so I think the Trump administration is kind of forcing a test of these limits in a way that is creating more resistance from these really important parts of civil society than we've seen yet. And we'll see if the politics shifts, right? I mean, Trump seems to think that by keeping the focus on immigration or attacking an elite school, that that's a win for him politically. But when you go this far and you just deny people any chance for a hearing when you are snatching them up and scooting them off to a really brutal prison in another country, that may be a bridge too far for a lot of Americans.
Right, and it's certainly anti-conservative in the traditional sense, anti-American in that the due process and habeas rights are one of the fundamentals going all the way back to the revolution. You mentioned the defiance is on purpose. When the ruling came down on Garcia and they said facilitate the return, in those breaking coverage first few minutes, I discussed with another lawyer, not unlike yourself, a legal expert, that a lot was going to come down to facilitate because this is not a normal administration that has acted in good faith. Now, if they wanted to just slow roll it, they could say, we'll see. Hey, we asked. They could say in public and then in private, have other things going on. They're not doing that. They're not being coy or slow. I want to play for you what the Attorney General says.
He is not coming back to our country. President Bukele said he was not sending him back. That's the end of the story. If he wanted to send him back, we would give him a plane ride back. There was no situation ever where he was going to stay in this country. None.
He's not coming back is a long way from we tried or we want to facilitate. Even by what I call the crack in the door that Chief Justice Roberts left open, even by that standard, she's going further. Can the Supreme Court leave this as the result and then expect future more controversial or tougher case orders to be followed?
I mean, I don't see how they can do that, especially after this stirring opinion today from Judge Harvey Wilkinson, who is a deeply conservative Reagan appointee. He's 80 years old. He's respected throughout the federal judiciary. And he ended that opinion by saying, you know, it's not too late for the executive branch and the judicial branch to show each other the customary respect that our system depends on. So he is kind of imploring the government to change its stance. Now, I agree with you. We've seen no evidence of that from the government so far, but the stakes are really clear, and it's just hard to see how the judicial branch can let this one slide, given the level of defiance and also the kind of farcical nature of what Attorney General Pam Bondi is saying, right? I mean, this is not a decision that is up to the president of El Salvador. The United States of America is paying for the incarceration of Abrego Garcia in another country, but still he is there because of the United States, not because of El Salvador.
Does anything give you hope for the Supreme Court holding the line?
Well, I mean, the opinion they issued last week, while you're right, it had a crack in it or two, did say that the government has to treat this case as if Mr. Abrego Garcia had not been illegally deported to El Salvador, because the government admitted they did that by mistake. And so it's not legal. And I see the Supreme Court language where they say they say to the government, you're supposed to take steps to facilitate his return as going down the right path. That does give me some optimism about the Supreme Court continuing to uphold the rule of law here.
Striking. All right. Well, great to get that from you, Emily. You'll stay busy. We'll keep working. We'll see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to fit in a break, but we have some special guests coming up as we dig into the hope for the future. According to Bernie Sanders, he says it's up to young people. You got to go out and meet them where they are, which is why he took the big stage at Coachella. Our own Gotti Schwartz and Lupe Fiasco coming up.
Get up here.
It's been another one of those weeks, and as we get near the end, it's time to fall back. We got two special guests tonight. Returning to the beat is Grammy Award-winning rapper, songwriter, producer, and professor Lupe Fiasco, known for his unique style.
Like the governor called and he told him to wait. Unstrap him from the chair and put him back in his cage. You gon' touch the sky? Yes, yes, yes. Guess who's on third? Lupe still like Lupin the Third.
Dream definitely goes on now because Lupe is part of academia, teaching at MIT and Yale, and a professor at Johns Hopkins University's hip-hop program. Also joining us, and Lupe was just asking if he has a music video montage.
Just the name. Just stop it at the name. There's nothing. Don't even play anything after
NBC's
that.
Gotti Schwartz.
I can't do anything.
Who's been reporting on many important stories, including the difficult California wildfires. Regular seen on Today and Nightly News, and he has the show Stay Tuned Now, which streams nightly on NBC News now at 8 p.m. Eastern. Doing it for the streamers. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
How you doing?
Yeah.
Gotti was telling me before you showed up that he's a longtime listener.
A longtime listener. And in fact, one of the things that I've been complaining about is AI creeping into everything. And yet I've seen you use an AI ahead of everybody else. And so one of the things, Deezer, that streamer in France, they now have, I believe it's an AI bot that goes through and it is checking to see what has been AI generated. They're taking down like 20,000 AI songs, I think, a month. And then it's like, wait, so do we use AI for music? Do we not? I remember watching some clips of you playing with it.
Yeah.
So yeah, what do you think? I mean, I would love to get your take.
Yeah, I mean, I built a AI platform called Text Effects with Google a couple years ago, a year back, which was about using AI in a way not to remove the artist, not to completely create work from scratch, but to kind of like isolate some of the processes in the creative process, the tools and the many little moves and things that you would do to create something. But then there's also like things that are like the technology is, and the products of it are super impressive. It's things that I could have never have done. The speed, the efficiency is just, is too big to not use it. And it's too good not to use it at this point. Maybe 6 months ago, different. But now it's very, very refined. Very, very accurate.
Does it make you feel things? I mean, like music has always been about like feeling something. And the only times I've felt something with AI is like when I get tricked by somebody, I don't know, doing like some deep fake. And I'm like, damn, all right, it got me there. But like, can it create that weird human vibe that's hard to describe?
Yeah, it can. I created something using Suno. Which is actually a AI firm based out of, they're in Harvard Square, actually, so they're based in Cambridge, not too far from MIT. And I got emotional. Like it was very, very, it was like, wow, like this has impact. It took you, I mean, the way I use it, I kind of daisy chain it, I add different things, I do some editing, kind of arrange it. And so there's some curation that has to take place to get that emotionality that I'm looking for. But it's definitely possible, for sure.
How do you feel about people that have like no business in music, just being like, yo, I can make some money here. I'm just gonna execute, make this, upload it, and then just keep doing that over and over and over.
Well, everybody has business in music.
Hey.
Everybody come on in. Everybody's welcome. You know what I'm saying? To take a shot at it, express yourself. Whether they should be doing it professionally and asking you to pay them for it is another thing. But I think for the most part that it is a good thing. I say that with a grain of salt. But from my work with it, my students at MIT actually building these things. My students actually work at Suno, so it's a whole, I'm in the whole kind of pipeline of it. I know that their intentions for it are very good, and I know the passion that they have for music and creativity is also very good. And so they're not going to do something for the sake of taking something away from somebody else or anything like that maliciously. But also I think it's an opportunity for artists to kind of give themselves permission, as I heard from an artist who was using AI, give themselves permission to work on the projects that they needed $1 million at one point.
Right. Yeah, it can really level the playing field, to your point. And as an educator, you're dealing with the next generation that's going to be up in these tools in every field, every profession. So it's a question of how to use it. We also want to ask you about Coachella, which just went down. You've played that main stage. We saw the clip of you and Tyler, the Creator.
Yeah.
Seeing Bernie Sanders, who, with all respect, he doesn't look like your core average Coachella attendee, although everybody's welcome.
Everybody's welcome.
And yet what he's doing in this moment where there's been different discussions about how to engage, and we got this here, let's listen to how he was brought out and what he said to the crowds there.
And the future of what happens to America is dependent upon your generation. We need you to stand up to fight for justice.
What do you see there in people trying to come out of DC or a political event and bringing it and meeting people, including young people, where they're at?
He should have freestyled. He should have took an opportunity to freestyle. I mean, you got to meet people where they are, like we talked about earlier, right? Like you have to kind of go to where the energy is, where the next steps, and what the steps that are being made now that are going to affect who is going to affect the most. And it is the future. It's the next generations that are coming. Even AI is going to affect them. Politics is going to affect everything. Will affect them. So I think it's a matter of I think it's smart. I think Bernie has that energy and that respect, as an OG. I think we look at him and appreciate him as an OG. And I think he really has the good, the goodness in his heart and wants that for everybody else outside his politics. Like, I think he's just a really good guy.
Yeah, you're talking about him as a person. I'm curious, Gotti, what you think, because when I look at this, there was a period in American music when resistance and protest and politics were central. We've covered that on this program. And then there was a period, and you sort of stood against some of this in hip hop, but there was a period where it was so much glitz. It's like you couldn't tell the difference between certain types of Wall Street, Reaganomics and the music. And I wonder whether there's also this cycling back. And we follow that in 24, again, as you said, people can pick their politics, but the idea that you could jump in, people told Taylor Swift, well, just don't get involved. It's going to alienate some of your fans, right? And then we've seen more and more artists say, even if it's a risk, they're going to do it. And Bernie at Coachella and artists doing that. Again, it's not campaign season. No one's going to get a vote in April. So it's more civic, which harkens back to Woodstock was, of course, intertwined between music and an idea about protest.
Yeah, part of me wonders if, there were a line of thirsty politicians that did want to go to Coachella and they looked at the list and they're like, no. Let's see who fits here. Only Bernie. Like you said, I mean, he's an OG. Yeah. And you've got libertarians that have supported him. You've got progressives that have supported him. He's got like a lot of bona fides here. I do agree, though. He should have dropped something.
I would have loved to freestyle. We only have 1 minute left, and you had a fallback, Gotti, about drinks.
Oh yeah, drinks at Coachella. In fact, they're selling like non-alcoholic drinks. I was thinking, food and liquor. Right. Tribute to the old food and liquor. Right. And as a non-drinker, I remember listening to that as a kid and being like, look, no, somebody understands and sees the world in this way of like, no, you don't have to drink to fit in. Right. You were like a god to me because of that. Right. But then I see over at Coachella, they're expanding You Soberchella. Everybody's marketing this like very expensive drinks without alcohol. And then I'm like, I kind of like that. And yet I also feel like water, I don't know, maybe those like liquid IV.
Shout out to
things.
water.
Big shout out to water.
Shout out to water.
Yeah, here we go. Some water right here.
There we go.
Fun fact: Heineken 00. Shout out to my man Dolph, who's the CEO of Heineken. I'm one of the reasons that Heineken 00 exists because I wasn't able to drink with the rest of the crew. You know, we have our little seminars at the Aspen Institute, and he would bring in all his Heineken. I was like, I can't participate. I got to drink water. So he made Heineken 00 for me. So I'm for it. All mocktails, right? Any non-alcoholic, what have you, more water as well.
And if you're going to Coachella, look for that on the shelf there, right?
Sober clarity. And the Times had a piece I was going to shout out this week that was talking about how nightclub culture has changed because the younger generation are drinking less or not at all. So they're not buying the 3-4, Red Bull vodkas of the past.
Back in the day, I was so dancey. I wanted people to get on my level. So I'd be like, yeah, if you got to drink, hurry up.
Meet you they have to drink to get to your sober.
But if you tap into music, right,
We like that. All right, now I'm out of time. I got to pass to the next host. Lupe Gotti, thank you. We'll be right back. Thanks for watching The Beat with Ari Melber.